Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Yende. Let me ask you a question that may sound a little unusual at first. Have you ever noticed that some family dinners end in laughter, warmth, and easy conversation, while others seem to end in irritability, tension, or silence, a disagreement, an argument, a bad mood that hangs in the air long after the plates are cleared, a teenager becoming unusually emotional, a parent suddenly becoming impatient, a spouse becoming distant or withdrawn? Most people naturally assume these reactions are purely psychological. Maybe it's personality, maybe it's stress from work, maybe it's relationship tension. And yes, those factors absolutely matter. But what if there is something else happening beneath the surface? What if the food on the dinner table is quietly influencing the emotional atmosphere in the room? What if glucose spikes, insulin surges, and inflammatory signals are subtly shaping the way people speak, listen, react, and connect? Today, we're exploring one of the most fascinating intersections in modern health science: metabolism, neuroscience, wearable technology, and human relationships. Can optimizing blood sugar improve family harmony? Can continuous glucose monitors help us understand why some meals leave us calm and grounded, while others leave us restless and irritable? And could the future of emotional well-being begin, quite literally, at the dinner table? Welcome to the science of metabolic syncing, the hidden biology of mood. Most people think emotions come entirely from the brain, but the brain is not floating in isolation. It is deeply dependent on the body and especially on a steady supply of energy. In fact, the brain is one of the most metabolically demanding organs in the human body. Although it makes up only about 2% of body weight, it consumes roughly 20% of the body's energy. That means the brain is highly sensitive to changes in fuel availability, and one of its primary fuels is glucose. When glucose stays relatively stable, the brain can function efficiently. But when glucose rises and falls too sharply, the brain notices. Attention shifts, energy changes, decision-making becomes harder, patience begins to wear thin, mood can become unstable. The emotional effects may be subtle at first, but they are very real. Sometimes what looks like irritability, anxiety, or fatigue is not just in the mind. It may be the nervous system responding to metabolic instability. The post-dinner crash. Now imagine a typical modern dinner: white rice, bread, dessert, sugary beverages, processed foods. The meal tastes delicious, satisfying, even comforting in the moment. But what happens next inside the body is where the story becomes interesting. Blood sugar rises rapidly. Insulin surges to help move glucose out of the bloodstream and into cells. The body works hard to restore balance. Then, a few hours later, blood sugar may drop, energy may drop, mental clarity may drop, and irritability often rises. Some researchers refer to this as reactive hypoglycemia, or the body's overcorrection after a sharp glucose rise. The person may not recognize the biological pattern at all. They may simply feel tired, hungry again, restless, foggy, or emotionally reactive for reasons they cannot easily explain. The brain interprets unstable fuel delivery as a stress signal, and when the brain senses stress, behavior often changes before a person even consciously understands why. Why families experience it together. Here is where things become especially fascinating. Most family members eat the same meal at roughly the same time, which means their metabolic responses often happen in parallel. One person experiences a sharp glucose spike. Another experiences a bigger insulin surge. A child crashes emotionally after dessert. A parent suddenly feels drained. A teenager becomes edgy or argumentative. The result? Several nervous systems becoming dysregulated at once. The dinner table can become a perfect little metabolic storm. Not because anyone intended for it to happen, not because the family lacks love, but because biology is working quietly in the background, shaping the emotional climate of the room. The glucose-mood connection. One of the most important lessons from modern continuous glucose monitoring is this: two people can eat the exact same meal and have completely different glucose responses. One person's glucose may rise only moderately. Another person's glucose may surge dramatically. One person remains stable, calm, and focused. Another experiences a crash that leaves them tired, irritable, or mentally scattered. This variability helps explain why some people feel fine after a meal while others become unusually emotional or drained. The emotional response may not be purely psychological, it may be metabolic. And once we begin to see that connection, we begin to understand human behavior with much more nuance and compassion. The inflammation factor. Glucose is not just an energy molecule. Repeated large glucose excursions may also activate inflammatory pathways, especially in individuals who are already metabolically vulnerable. And inflammation does not stay confined to the body, it affects the brain too. Inflammation can influence brain function, mood regulation, cognitive performance, sleep quality, stress resilience, and emotional stability. The brain and immune system are in constant conversation with one another. When inflammation rises, the brain responds, sometimes as fatigue, sometimes as brain fog, sometimes as irritability, sometimes as a reduced ability to cope with ordinary stress. This is one reason a person may feel off after certain meals, even if they cannot put their finger on exactly why. What continuous glucose monitors are teaching us. For many years, we had to rely on occasional blood tests and broad assumptions, but now we can monitor glucose continuously, minute by minute, meal by meal, day by day. That gives us a completely new way to understand the body. We can identify which foods create sharp spikes, which combinations help stabilize glucose, how exercise affects metabolic response, how sleep influences glucose control, how stress changes insulin sensitivity, and perhaps most importantly, how each person's biology responds differently. The era of guessing is ending. The era of metabolic intelligence has begun. We are moving toward a world where we no longer ask only, is this food healthy? We also ask, how does this food affect this specific person? That shift changes everything. The fiber-first strategy. One of the most powerful and practical discoveries in metabolic research is surprisingly simple. Food order matters. Imagine eating a salad before the main course. Vegetables first, protein second, carbohydrates last. This sequence often helps reduce glucose spikes significantly. Why? Because fiber slows digestion, protein slows gastric emptying, and as a result, glucose enters the bloodstream more gradually rather than in one large burst. That creates smoother metabolic control and potentially smoother emotional regulation as well. The meal is still enjoyable, the experience is still satisfying, but the body's response becomes calmer and more balanced. Sometimes, small changes create the biggest shifts. The sequential macronutrient effect. Researchers are increasingly interested in meal sequencing, which refers to the order in which nutrients are consumed. Fiber first, protein next, healthy fats included along the way, carbohydrates last. This approach may reduce post-meal glucose spikes, lower insulin demand, improve satiety, reduce energy crashes, and potentially support more stable mood throughout the day. The same food, a different order, a very different biological response. That is the kind of insight that can transform how families think about meals, not as fixed rituals, but as opportunities to shape physiology in a more supportive direction. The family metabolic experiment. Imagine a household where everyone wears a glucose monitor for 2 weeks. Parents, teenagers, and where appropriate, other family members as well. Over time, you begin to see patterns. Pizza affects one person dramatically, rice affects another. Bread affects someone else. Some people tolerate breakfast well but crash after dinner. Some people do best with movement after meals. Others need more protein and fiber to stay steady. Suddenly, you are no longer relying on trends, assumptions, or one-size-fits-all advice. You are working with real data, real biology, real individual responses. This becomes a family metabolic experiment in the best possible sense. Not about restriction, not about fear, not about blame, but about understanding, optimization, and better health. The brain loves stability. The brain evolved in a world where energy availability was often unpredictable, food was not always abundant, meals were not always guaranteed, so the brain developed to be highly sensitive to energy stability. Today we live in a very different environment. Food is constantly available. Snacks are everywhere. Sugary drinks are routine. Processed carbohydrates are common, but the brain still performs best when fuel delivery is steady and predictable. Stable glucose often supports more consistent attention, better emotional regulation, improved patience, sharper decision-making, less reactive behavior, and greater resilience in the face of stress. The goal is not to eliminate carbohydrates. The goal is to eliminate metabolic chaos. Metabolic syncing and family harmony. What if family wellness is not only about communication skills? What if it is also about physiology? Imagine a household where everyone sleeps better, everyone experiences fewer glucose crashes, everyone recovers more effectively after stressful days, everyone has more stable energy, everyone feels less reactive and more present, conversations improve, patience improves, conflict decreases. Not because personalities were magically transformed, but because the body was better supported. Sometimes emotional harmony begins with metabolic harmony, and when families understand that, they can begin to build healthier routines together. The future of the dinner table. Now imagine the future. Smart homes integrating continuous glucose monitoring, wearables tracking recovery and stress, heart rate variability trends, sleep metrics, meal suggestions tailored to each person, artificial intelligence helping identify patterns that the human eye would miss, a system that can recognize family stress patterns, metabolic vulnerabilities, optimal meal timing. best food combinations for each individual. The future of family health may become far more personalized than it is today, but at the same time, it may also become more connected. Because when people understand their biology better, they often understand one another better too. The OXYZEN perspective. At OXYZEN, we believe health intelligence begins with learning how to interpret the invisible signals that shape behavior. Glucose, stress, sleep, recovery, inflammation, heart rate variability. These are not isolated metrics, they are interconnected systems constantly influencing one another. The future of wellness is not just about eating better. It is about understanding how biology shapes emotions, how biology shapes relationships, how biology shapes performance, and how biology shapes quality of life. That is where real transformation begins. Final thought. So perhaps the next time tension rises around the dinner table, we should ask a different question. Not, what is wrong with this person? But rather, what is happening inside their biology? Because sometimes the difference between conflict and connection, between irritability and patience, between stress and harmony, may be hidden inside a glucose curve. I'm Dr. Yende, and this is OXYZEN Health Intelligence. And before I leave you, I want to ask one final question. If you could see your family's glucose responses in real time, would it change the way you plan your meals? Let us know in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next episode.